So, all these videos about Donald Trump, Jeff Epstein, the Bank of New York, Sinclair Media. It ties in with me in another way that's just really incredibly unbelievable. I want to tell you about that right now. So, this weird, evil, secretive group of people, all weird sex freaks, tried to pull a fast one on me in 2016. And I know it. So, in 2016, I was in my house in Eugene looking for some renters. And I touched upon this subject in another video at one point, but very briefly. I think I'm going to go into detail about this because it's really weird. So I'm at my house. This guy named John lives with me, John Campbell, big fat guy, right? I called him Little John. It's kind of funny. We had a big laugh about it. We were good buddies. One day, this guy, I'm renting rooms out, and I even put an ad out saying, I got camping space in the back of my third of an acre yard. So this guy calls me and says, "Hey, I'm looking for camping." And I'm like, "All right, come on over." And he comes over with this woman, and he wants to give me $500 and a quarter pound of pot just to camp in my backyard for a month. I'm like, "Well, that's a little weird, but I guess I'll accept it. Why wouldn't I?" And so I told my buddy John, I'm like, it seems like this guy's probably on the run from the law, like some kind of convicted serial rapist or something. And my buddy John goes, "You can't say that stuff about your tenants, man." And I'm like, "I know, it's just a feeling. So anyway, that couple acted kind of normal that night. We went over to Walmart and bought some stuff, and then they come back and they spend the night. And the next morning, the woman comes running into my house, right, early morning, saying she's fearing for her life, and that the guy she's with has kidnapped her, and that she's like used to be his friend, and she's like suffering from Stockholm syndrome. And so I tell her, "Give me the guy's name," and John's like flabbergasted. He couldn't believe it how I called it. I tell you, I called if you ever talk to John Campbell, he works at Connects Auto Parts there on Century Boulevard in Eugene, Oregon. He'll tell you, I called it every step of the way, every shot, and I'm going to call the next one right now here in this video. So the guy who came to my house to camp was on the run from the law out of Idaho. He was what they called the barefoot midnight thief or whatever. He would go into people's houses, he'd rob all the good stuff from their house, put it by the door, and go back up into the bedroom and rape the woman while she's sleeping. And then as soon as she would wake up and realize she's being raped, he'd run out and take the goods and run out, run off. And so he was on the run for these terrible, armed, violent sexual crimes. Sound familiar? Like Jeff Epstein? Like part of the Jeff Epstein group? So anyway, somehow this guy was told to be channelized to go to my house and to try to offer this chick to me or something, right? And to get me involved in his kidnapping and his sexual escapades. And when I didn't go for it, the chick comes running in and says she's being kidnapped and call the cops. So me and John, we look up the guy online and we realize, holy shit, this guy's a wanted, seriously bad guy by the law. So we instantly called the cops. It's the first time I ever had to call the cops on my property, ever in my whole life. And like every single law enforcement agency and their mother descended upon my property at like 8 in the morning or whatever. But what was curious is that, here I am, I'm saving a hostage. I have an armed crisis situation on my land with a hostage, with a guy who's on the run from the law. And the news media didn't show up. It was never reported in the media. It was really weird. I saved a girl's life. And I put an armed rapist in prison for the rest of his life. He went directly from my house to prison for the rest of his life. Now, at the time, I was just too astounded. I couldn't believe all these things were happening. I never made any connections about anything. But this was an election year. And then one of the people who ended up renting from me was this lady named Terry, who I'm pretty sure was a Trumper. She was sent to spy on me for the Donald Trump people. And They wanted to know if I was going to vote for Donald Trump or what was, my politics. I was guess like one of those weather indicators of what was going to happen. So they wanted to know what I thought, what I was going to do, and who I was counseling and whatever. All this weird stuff. I'm not going to go into that. Just let's stick with the armed rapist on my property that the media never covered. Why? Sinclair Media covers and controls Eugene and Portland, Oregon. So obviously Sinclair Media, if it's backing Donald Trump and secretly Jeff Epstein is involved in all this stuff, they're not going to report what happened to me on my property. But I guarantee you that if I tried to touch that woman and participate in that guy's crime, the media would have descended on my house in a heartbeat. Because they were using the Jeff Epstein. This was a Jeff Epstein guy. This was part of a whole plot to screw with me, to invalidate me and make me look like a bad guy. But when I ended up being the good guy, nobody was there to report it. And I was like, whoa, what? How did that happen? And in all of my travels all the way everywhere around the world, I have never, ever had anything happen like that, where somebody would roll up on me with guns and a hostage and demand to stay on my land or whatever, or ask to stay on my land, and be on the run from the law for some serious, violent sexual crimes. Wow, I've never had that happen anywhere in the world. So as far as I'm concerned, number one most dangerous country in the world is the United States. I mean, shit. And so why wasn't it covered? I think this is what we have to go ask ourselves. Why wasn't a hero applauded in the media? Because they wanted me to be a villain? Because I was being set up by a secret organization? And maybe even the cops were involved? Because the Eugene cops are definitely corrupt. And I'll tell you how you know. Heroin and methamphetamine have been destroying the city of Eugene for like the last 20 years. And everybody can very easily go and find those drugs on the street to this day. How is it the cops never figured it out? How come they were never able to stop the flow? How come they were never able to arrest any of these people who are doing all this stuff? Why? Because they're in on the take. Bought and paid for by people like Donald Trump. Why do you think Donald Trump hasn't been processed? I mean, shit. People, you gotta wake up. We're being boonswoggled by a small group of people who think they're so cool that they don't need to do what the rest of us have to do. And they don't need to deal with what the rest of us have to deal with on a day in, day out basis. And then when somebody like me gets powerful and starts to raise up his head and say, hey, wait a minute, what happened to justice? They try and send like an armed rapist on the run from the law to my house to screw with me, to trap me and trip me up in his crime, to make me look out to be the bad guy so that somebody like Donald Trump could look better? Fuck you. Donald Trump better get arrested, and the Jeff Epstein case better be resolved, or I'm never going to pay taxes again for sure, because I'm sure that secret society came and fucked with me and tried to screw with me with this weird situation that happened on my property 4 years ago or 5 years ago now. Believe me. I mean, anybody who wants to go check on it, go look at the police call records for that spring in 2016 at my house, 3751 Dove Lane. And you'll see, man, I called the cops to my house for an armed rapist on the run from the law who was trying to involve me in his crime. And he was sent to me by some secret society who were desperate to screw with me to make themselves look good. Leopold Richard Bamberg Galavizos, reporting to you about the true situation in the world.